The copy I kept is a sandbag inventory form, fob Callern, dated the 14th of October. 9 entries in her handwriting, neat, small, the kind of print that doesn't waste space. And then the column stops. Whoever took the log from her after the convoy came back in that evening didn't ask her to finish it. Neither did I. I've had my copy for 6 years, and I still don't know what I'd write in the blank space after the 9th row. Her name was on the morning detail board. Convoy security, lead element, Dasa Bridge Road 0630 departure. 11 names, and hers was the 7th. I read it off myself when I pinned the sheet, because I was the one who drove the lead vehicle, and I wanted to know who was riding on my flanks. Gunnery Sergeant Farrow read it too. He came into the staging area at 0545 before the vehicles were warmed, and he stood in front of the element. 22 Marines plus 2 attached personnel, and he read the board, and then he turned and found her, checking her optics kit beside the second truck. She had a rifle case open on the hood, and she was working through a pre-mount function check, deliberate and unhurried, the way a person does a thing they have done several thousand times. No wasted movement. No checking whether anyone was watching. Just the work, in order, each step given the attention it was owed. Farrell walked over and stood until she looked up. She gave him a second to speak first. When he didn't, she looked up. "What's your assignment?" he said. "Convoy security, Gunny. Lead element, right flank." He looked at the rifle. He looked at her. He had been in the Corps 21 years, and he carried that weight visibly in the set of his jaw and the way he planted his boots, and he had never in those 21 years had reason to question his own read on a situation. "You're a gate sentry," he said. "Not a shooter." She didn't say anything. "I've got 11 names on that board, and I need 11 people who've been in a shooting lane more than twice. You're not one of them." He held out his hand. "Give me the clipboard." She handed it to him. He walked to a fold-out table near the motor pool gate, wrote her name off the security detail, and wrote in a replacement. Then he walked back and gave her a different clipboard, a sandbag inventory form, rear checkpoint, 9 pages of numbered rows. "Count them," he said. "Every bag on the east berm. We need an accurate number before the next resupply." He said it in front of everyone, all 22. I was standing 6 feet away, next to the hood of my vehicle, and I watched it happen, and I said nothing. I told myself it was not my place. I told myself Farrow knew his element. I told myself a lot of things in the 2 seconds it would have taken me to say something, and then the moment passed and I went back to checking my mirrors. She took the sandbag clipboard. She walked to the rear checkpoint without looking back. We rolled out at 0633. The Dasa Bridge Road is 11 kilometers of 2-lane hardpack cut between a limestone ridge on the north side and a dry riverbed on the south. There is no room to turn a vehicle. There is no room to spread into a defensive line. You drive it in column, slow, because the surface breaks up past the 4th kilometer, and you keep your eyes on the ridge, because the ridge is the only place a threat can come from that matters. The riverbed gives you nothing. Anyone who sets up in the riverbed is making a mistake they will regret. But the ridge is 60 meters of vertical limestone, and if someone owns the high ground up there before you get there, you are driving into a box. Farrow knew all of this. He had driven the Dasa Road 14 times in 11 months. At kilometer 7, the column slowed for a surface break that had widened since the last run. The lead vehicle, mine, stopped. The column compressed. 6 vehicles in a 200-meter stretch, and the ridge above us, and the dry riverbed below, and everybody still, and the radio traffic from the rear vehicle cutting out mid-sentence and then going to static. The first shot hit Farrow's vehicle. Not his truck. The gunny was in the 3rd position, but the truck directly behind mine, the 2nd in column. The driver's side glass went, and the vehicle lurched right and stopped at an angle, blocking the road. I was already out of my door and behind the engine block when the 2nd and 3rd shots came in from the ridge, high, probing, and I remember thinking that was wrong. That was not the angle. If you own the ridge and you have a column stopped on the road below you, the angle you pick is steep and direct, and you do not probe, you work. The 4th shot was different. It came from higher up the ridge than the first 3, and it did not hit a vehicle. I heard it, and then I heard nothing from the position that had fired the first 3 rounds. Farrow's radio crackled. Nothing coherent. The element was spread across 200 meters of road, and the dust from the 2nd vehicle was still settling, and I had 4 Marines behind my truck, and nobody had a clean line of sight to the ridgetop because the grade was too steep from the road surface. We were below the angle. We were blind. The 5th shot came from higher on the ridge than the 4th, then the 6th. Between the 6th and the 7th, there was a pause of about 40 seconds. I remember it because I counted. I have a habit of counting when I am waiting for something I cannot control. It gives the mind a smaller problem to work. I counted to 39, and then the seventh shot came. And after the seventh shot, the road was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes when an engagement is taking a breath. The kind that comes when it is over. We did not know that yet. We stayed behind the vehicles for another 6 minutes. I was on the radio to the Fabab, and I was giving our position, and I was listening for movement on the ridge, and there was none. No voices, no loose rock under boots, no secondary shots, probing our cover. Nothing. The dust from the second vehicle had settled completely. The wind was off the riverbed, dry and low. The only sounds were the engine ticks of vehicles cooling, and, once, a piece of glass falling from the second truck's frame and hitting the hard pack. At minute 7, one of the Marines from the third vehicle worked his way up the embankment on the south side, the riverbed side, away from the ridge, and came back around the disabled second truck and reported to me that Farrow was down. Not dead. Left arm, mid-forearm, probable fracture from a fragment off the doorframe. He was conscious, and he was loud about being conscious, which I took as a good sign. We held position for 9 more minutes, still nothing from the ridge. At minute 16, I made the call to push. We could not stay on the Dassa Road with one vehicle across the lane and the gunny's vehicle running on a flat from a fragment hit. We had a tow bar. We had enough hands. We cleared the disabled truck to the shoulder, got the column moving, and drove the last 4 kilometers at a pace I am not proud of, watching the ridge the entire way, and the ridge gave us nothing. We came through the Fob Callern Gate at 10:49. I did not understand what had happened until the debrief, and even after the debrief, I did not fully understand it until I talked to Corporal Reese, who had been in the third vehicle, and who had the best sightline to the upper ridge from his position during the engagement. Reese said he had counted 7 shots. He said they had come from 3 separate positions on the ridge, each higher than the last, over a span he estimated at 28 to 31 minutes. He said the positions were not random. They were spaced in a pattern that worked the ridge from east to west along the crown, cutting off anyone trying to withdraw from the initial firing point to cover higher up. She was driving them, Reese said. He meant whoever was up there. She wasn't just shooting. She was pushing them where she wanted them. I asked him how he knew it was a single shooter. He thought about that. The intervals, he said. Everything between shots was the same. Like a metronome. Whoever that was, they were not in a hurry. The intelligence summary came back 48 hours later. 4 confirmed on the ridge. Positions running from the initial firing point at 3, 640 meters from the east end of the Dassa Bridge to a final position 190 meters west along the crown. The last confirmed location used before the ridge went silent. The report noted that the initial firing point was unusual. 3, 640 meters from the column's stopped position at Kalamslaughter 7 was outside the effective range of any weapon in the assessed threat inventory for that sector. The analyst flagged it as anomalous. I read that and I sat with it for a while. Then I pulled the morning detail board out of my vehicle log. 7 names. Hers had been crossed off in Farrow's handwriting, replaced by Lance Corporal Denny, who had a bloody nose from the first shot's pressure wave and was otherwise fine. Her name was still readable under the crossout. I went to the rear checkpoint. She was sitting at the fold-out table with the sandbag inventory clipboard, entering the 9th row. Her kit was beside her, rifle case closed. She had dust on her boots and her sleeves and a pale line of dried sweat along her jaw, and she looked up when I came around the corner of the berm, and she looked back down at the clipboard. 9, she said. East berm, 4th section. She made the entry. I'll finish the north berm tomorrow if that works. I stood there. I did not know what to say to her, so I said the first true thing I could find. You were on the ridge. She did not deny it. She did not explain it. She capped her pen and set the clipboard flat on the table and looked at me, with an expression that was not cold and was not warm. It was simply level, the way a person looks when they have already answered the question in the only way that matters, and they are waiting for the room to catch up. The convoy came back, she said. That was all she said. Gunnery Sergeant Farrow came to the rear checkpoint at 1740. His left arm was in a field dressing, and he had his sleeve cut away, and he was walking carefully, favoring the side where the fragment had gone through the door and found him, and he came around the berm the same way I had 3 hours earlier, and he stopped when he saw her. She was still at the table. She had moved on to the north berm count, and she had a new page on the clipboard. She looked up. Farrow stood there for a moment. He was not a man who struggled for words. 21 years had given him a complete set, but he stood there in the late afternoon light, and something worked behind his eyes that I had never seen on his face before in 9 months of serving with him. He came to attention. His good arm snapped to the correct position. His left came up at the elbow, slow and deliberate, against the dressing, and he held it there, 1, 2, 3, 4, a full salute, rendered at the rear checkpoint of Fob Callern, in front of the 8 Marines who had drifted over from the motor pool to see what the gunny was doing. She set down the pen. She came to her feet without hurry. She returned the salute 4 counts, clean, and held it until he dropped his hand. "Noted, gunny," she said. She sat back down and picked up the pen and went back to the North Berm count. He stood there a moment longer. Then he turned and walked back toward the motor pool, and the 8 Marines moved out of his way without being asked. And nobody said anything. I still have the sandbag form, the copy from the detail sheet, not hers. 9 entries, her handwriting, the column ending at row 9. No signature at the bottom, no total. The form doesn't tell you anything, except that someone counted 9 sandbags in the 4th section of the East, berm on the 14th of October, and then stopped. I've thought about why she stopped at 9. I used to think it was because I came around the corner and broke her count. Now I think she stopped because the convoy was due back, and she had somewhere to be, and the sandbags were going to be there regardless.